Good morning, Highland. Or if you're watching this later, good afternoon, good evening. Glad that we can come together and study God's Word here, and we can continue our study in the book of Genesis as we are surveying through this book. And remember, last week we started talking about Abram. We gave an introduction to Abram, which we would later know as Abraham. But before he becomes Abraham, he's got some journey. He has a journey to take before he becomes that man that we so love and dear. But we're looking at his character. We're looking at his faith in God, and rightfully so, he is listed, like we mentioned last week, he's listed in Hebrews 11 because of how big his faith was, even though there was difficulty in his life, both from outer sources and then also from the very things that he did. So he was definitely not a perfect man by any stretch of the imagination, but he was a faithful man, a trustworthy man of God. And so we want to explore his life. And so we looked at Genesis 12, and now we are in Genesis 13. And really, the title for this Bible class, this lesson, is Conflict and Choices. So, and how we navigate through conflict and choices. So, let's read Genesis 13, and then we'll get into this lesson. So, Genesis 13, starting at verse number 1. So Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him into the Negev. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold, and he journeyed on from the Negev as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. And Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At the time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling in the land. Then Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left." And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram after Lot had separated from him, "Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward, for all the land that you see I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted. Arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you." So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mary, Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Some hard names, a little difficult names in there. So, looking at Genesis 13, 1 through 18, the entire chapter, we begin to look at this idea of conflict and choices. Here is a fact. In every conflict, there is a choice. In every conflict, there is a choice. When I was studying for this lesson and looking into this, I think this is so needed right now because of the atmosphere that we currently in. Right now, as I'm recording this, we do not have a president of the United States, or at least a newly elected president of the United States as of yet. You may be watching this on Sunday, and we may already know the answer to that, who the next president will be. But because of everything going on, I mean, this entire year, besides the election, this entire year, 2020, has been nothing more than so many conflicts and troubles and problems. But in all of those problems, even the magnitude of these problems, there is always a choice when we address these issues, when we address these conflicts, when we address these problems. There is always a choice that we can make. And there's often more than one choice that we can make. And I think sometimes we may be pressured into thinking that there's only one choice in these trying situations. No, there isn't just one choice. There's always more than one choice. The question is, and I'll ask this at the end, the question is, what choice will you make? What choice will I make with all the conflict that is going on, with all the problems that are arising? What will be your choice? I think about the words of Joshua, the famous words of Joshua in Joshua 24 and verse 15. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So here's Joshua basically proposing to the people of Israel, you have a choice. You have two choices. Either you can choose to follow after the gods of your forefathers, who really aren't gods at all. That's why you see this lowercase g here. They're not gods, they're false gods. So you can serve them and get nowhere. Or you can choose the God of Israel. You can serve him. And then he says, guess what choice I made? I chose God. So not only is he telling them that they have two choices, but then he's demonstrating to them that they can make the right choice. You see, again, we're pressured often in this life that there's only one choice when conflict arises. When sin is creeping at the door, when that temptation is there to give in to that sinful nature, we are pressured at times to think that the only choice we have is to give in. I mean, think about this. Probably an example that I think all of us have experienced to some degree is road rage. At the recording of this today, today Friday, I'll be going to a funeral, and I'm going to be driving all the way to Lancaster, California, which is about an hour and a half away. But I'm pretty sure that there will probably be some rude person on the road. and hopefully I won't cut anybody off. But I've experienced being cut off, and I'm sure you have too. And what's usually the reaction that one may be tempted to give? Well, road rage, right? Flip the birdie, and ride their tail, chase them down. San Diego, California, is actually rated one of the worst places for road rage. And matter of fact, a preacher friend of mine, Don Underwood, told us one time when I was over there doing a lectureship. He was telling us a story about how he was driving down the road in San Diego on a highway, and he was caught between two people basically throwing stuff as they're driving down the highway. He's in the middle of this. They're throwing stuff at each other. I mean, that's how bad the road rage is. So think about it. Think about the fact that, yeah, it started off with some type of conflict, but both of those people had a choice. You and I have a choice. Will we give in to the conflict? Will we give in and react the wrong way? And I really do believe, and I'll discuss this in a moment, that our reactions are a result of our lack of pro-action, being proactive. I think that's a big part, and I think looking at the example of Abram here, which we'll look at in a moment, he does something that is proactive that our quarterly doesn't necessarily. It does point it out, but not in the order that I thought it would. But we'll look at it in just a moment. But Abram does something proactive that I believe helps him in the conflict that he's about to experience. So just keep in mind that there are choices. We all have choices that we can make. Again, the question is, which choice will we have? So as we are in chapter 13, Abram and his family are leaving Egypt after there's a conflicting situation there. Remember, Abram says Sarai, when we go into Egypt, don't tell anybody that I'm your husband. Tell them that you are my sister. And so that's exactly what they do. The Pharaoh finds Sarai attractive and wants to marry her. And then God sends plagues upon him. Pharaoh tells Abram, why did you lie to me? Why did you not tell me that's your wife? I basically would have never done that. And he banishes them out of Egypt. So they're coming out of Egypt, and they are basically going back to the very place that they started, that the Lord brought them to, which was between Bethel and Ai. And so, as this is happening, there is a conflict that arises between Abram and Lot. So what is this conflict that is happening here? Well, think about this. In this land that they're living in, I would imagine, this is quite possible, that the famine has now ceased. So we don't know exactly what the time frame here is, but I would assume that the famine has ceased. But even if it hasn't, Abram and Lot both have a massive amount of possessions. So they have large flocks, large herds, and so they even had herdsmen to attend to them. But there's an issue, and the issue is that not all of the land can basically hold or help both of these men and their large amounts of possession. Not to mention the fact that the Canaanites and the Perizzites are also dwelling in the land. So they're not the only people dwelling in the land. Now, at first glance, it's interesting that Abraham and Lot would have an issue when there's more people living in the land. They're able to figure out the situation, right? And the situation is having the herdsmen or having the herds and the livestock be able to eat the grass fields and consume the water, the nearby water source. But for some reason, Abram and Lot's herdsmen can't seem to figure it out. So this conflict is that this strife happens between Abram's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen, which naturally brings strife between Abram and Lot. So this strife again is the fact that they can't seem to figure out how to use the land both to their advantage. They can't work together. And so this strife begins to unfold first between the herdsmen, but eventually between Abram and Lot. So right at the beginning here, we see that again, Abram and Lot aren't perfect, and neither are their herdsmen. And they're doing this right in front of the Canaanites and the Perizzites. So I just want you to think about this. And the quarterly, and by the way, we're using the Foundations Quarterly from the Gospel Advocate, and we are in lesson 10. So hopefully you read lesson 10 before being in this class. But what the quarterly rightly points out that that it's interesting that these people that are in the land with Abram and Lot and their people they're able to figure out how to work the land together. And they're witnessing Abraham and Lot not being able to figure this out. So as the quarterly tells us or shows us is that this is the same or can be the same reaction that the world has towards the people of God. And I think that's so interesting, especially right now. Because in this political climate that we are currently in, and basically from the time that we had the election, which was Tuesday, and from now till Friday, and possibly even to the day that you're watching this on Sunday, there have been so much activity of strife between people. But it's so interesting that the strife does not just end with the world, it's also rampant within the kingdom of God here in this country. And I would even say even around the world. But again, I'm sure that most people are watching this are Americans, so I'm addressing you right now, addressing us as Americans. But there's so much strife in the church here in America over this election, over who's going to be the president of the United States, over which party is going to take the stronghold. Now, aside from those things, I understand that there are some issues that are not political issues, but are issues of godliness that we made and politicized. So I'm not talking about that necessarily right now, but oftentimes we use things that are godly to then bring about strife. And that's exactly what's happening right now. But what is the world when we blast each other on Facebook, when we blast each other on social media, when we blast each other in the pulpit? What do you think the world is doing? They are seeing the strife. They are seeing the conflict amongst us, and they're saying, why would I want to be one of you? Why would I want to be a child of God? Why would I want to be a Christian? I mean, we are the joke of a lot of people. We are always criticized. Why are we going to add to that criticism or add fuel to the fire by basically causing strife between each other? And the last time I checked, the gospel condemns, the Bible condemns people who cause strife, who cause division. And that's what we're seeing right now in our political atmosphere. And it's not that it's something new, it's always been there, but it's becoming more and more prevalent today in our country and in the church here in America. So just think about that. Think about what the world sees. They see the strife. They see how we handle ourselves. And they wonder, they question who we are. So let's talk about the choices that Abram made, because that's really what is highlighted here in Genesis 13. We see that there's strife. We see that there's conflict. But how does Abram, who is the leader of this patriarchal family in this patriarchal system, how does Abram handle himself? Well, the quarterly book, lesson book, highlights three things, but I think there's a fourth thing, and I'm going to start with the fourth thing first. So there's one thing, and they address it later in lesson 10, but I think this is one of the choices that Abram made that helped him address or make the other three choices that we'll highlight here. So what was the first choice that Abram made? He chose to be connected to God. Look back at verses 3 and 4 and also verse 18 of chapter 13. And he journeyed on from the Negeb as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai. Look at verse 4. To the place where he had made an altar at the first, and there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. You drop down to verse 18. After the conflict is settled, after God reminds him of the promises that God gave to him and to his descendants, in verse 18, so Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. So Abram made a choice first, which was a proactive choice, proactive choice to be connected to God. So here's my first observation. We cannot make any choices to do the godly thing, not necessarily the right thing, because there's a lot of people that do the right thing, but unless you're connected to God, it's not the godly thing. So he chooses to do the godly thing because he is connected to God. So there's a proactive measure that Abram did before he chose on how to handle this conflict. And so you and I cannot handle conflict righteously without God. You and I cannot do the godly thing without God. So we have to choose, like Abraham, to be connected to God. That is a proactive measure. for us to be able to handle conflict. He chose to be connected to God. The second thing that he did after choosing to be connected to God, the second thing he did was he chose to speak kindly rather than harshly. Look at the beginning of verse number 8. Then Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen." He approaches it with the attitude of, I don't want strife between us. I don't want strife between your people and mine. And throughout this exchange, throughout Abram speaking to Lot, this solution, he is kind throughout it. And the quarterly points out, and I think this is so true, that Abram could have said, this promise of land is not for you, it's for me. So how about you just hush up and, leave my herdsmen alone and hush up. He could have said that. He could have done that, but he didn't. He spoke kindly rather than harshly. He loved on Lot. Do you love those that you have conflicts with? Are you kind? Or would you rather speak harshly towards them? So that's the second thing he does. The third thing he does is he chooses to value his relationship with Lot over possession. There was a lot of possessions that they had, a lot of wealth. They would have been considered wealthy men during their time. But he values his relationship rather than all of their possessions. Look at the end of verse 8. For we are kinsmen. We are brethren. I think that's so important right now. Knowing that there is conflict between brethren over politics. If you don't vote for this person, you're worse than an infidel. If you don't vote for this person, you're a baby killer. If you don't vote for this person, you're a racist. All of this conflict. And I'm sure that we are not anymore valuing the relationship that we have, that we're all connected to Jesus. And through Jesus, we are brethren. Do we value our relationships over possession? Over the blue versus the red possessing the country? Are we choosing to value our relationships? Now, I understand that there may be some issues that need to be addressed. But when people value our relationships, we are kind to each other, therefore we're willing to listen to one another. But if you're harsh towards people and you call them, and you say things to them as if they're not your family, they're not part of the family of God, then don't assume that people are going to listen. They won't. They'll be turned off, and the conflict will continue. He chose his relationship over possessions. He loved on Lot. I think he would then also love Lot's people as well. Then the fourth thing that he chooses to do, he attempts to resolve the problem swiftly before it escalated. So verse 9, is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left. Isn't that interesting that Abram doesn't tell Lot, Lot, I have chosen this land, so you got to go. You can find whatever land you want to, but right here is my land. That's not what he says. He says, you choose, Lot. Whatever you choose, I will make do. So he attempts to resolve the problem swiftly before it escalates to some type of situation that is out of control. I think of war. You know, there are people right now that are saying that we should go to war over all of this stuff that's going on. And they're trying to use the Bible to justify it. Church, when we're addressing a spiritual battle, it's a spiritual battle. It's not a battle of flesh and blood. It's not the battles of the Old Testament. We're dealing with a different battle of spiritual warfare. And our primary weapon is the gospel of Jesus. The gospel of Jesus can resolve conflict. But are we going to believe? Do we really believe that it can? When we say things like we're going to go to a physical battle with people, then basically what we're saying is that the gospel isn't powerful enough. Sorry, I shook my desk and something fell. Honestly, do we truly believe that the gospel is powerful enough to change the hearts of man? Or do we think that a physical war will handle it? He attempted to resolve the issue before it escalated to something worse. Are we willing to make the same choice? Are we willing to make the same choice? Really, the question is, and this is retrospect to really get us to think about this, we really got to ask ourselves a question: what kind of church are we called to be? And I think there's three things to consider here. I believe the church is called to be a loving and dedicated people. Who are we dedicated to? Or dedicated to Jesus. And we are supposed to show the love of Christ to everyone, especially our own. Are we seeing that right now? Are we seeing that playing out? We are supposed to be a place of inspiration, of hope and love. How are we inspiring people to hope and love if we are fighting amongst each other? The world's not inspired by that. We're supposed to be a haven of hope and love. And we're supposed to be a family and graceful atmosphere. And when all of those things are working together, we become the church that Jesus built. But if those things aren't working together, then we become nothing but a worldly haven, a worldly place. And we might as well call ourselves by some other name, because we can't call ourselves the church if we're constantly acting evil towards one another and towards the world. These are things we have to think about. This is what the church is called to be. And these are the things that we need to be reminded of right now because of what's going on in our world today and in our own country. Are we a place that is dedicated to the love of Jesus? Are we a place of inspiration, of the only hope that humanity has and the only love that can save a soul? And are we a family? And are we graceful? Is that our atmosphere? Is that our culture? When we live as the church, that's exactly what we will be. So going back to the original statement as we close, in every conflict, there is a choice. There is a choice. The question is, what choice will you make? Will you choose to be connected to God? Will you choose to do the proactive thing before the conflict even begins, before conflict arises? Are you connected to God? Because if you don't connect to God, then you are most likely to engage into the conflict falsely, the wrong way. Are you connected to God? Will you choose to speak kindly rather than harshly? Will you speak kindly rather than harshly? Will you choose to value relationships over possession, over, you name it, politics, employment status, family heritage, whatever it is? Will you choose to value your relationships in Jesus? Will you choose to value relationships with the world to bring them to Jesus over everything else? And then will you choose to attempt to resolve the problem swiftly before it escalates? I think this is the recipe to how we in the body of Christ handle conflict. And we learn all of this from this man, Abram, who we later know as Abraham, the father of faith. Will we have a faith like Abraham? One thing I'll point out that is pointed out also in the quarterly is that Lot also had a choice to make. And he chose to pick the land that appeared to be beautiful. And it was. But it was full of decay. Why? Because of the sin in the land. Which begs the question, or begs the statement, we have to be very careful about our choices. Because we may choose what may look good, but really, it's full of decay because of sin. So we have to be careful on what and who we choose. So thank you so much for spending time with me in this class. I hope this is helpful to you, and I hope that this will help you to bring some peace and some comfort and some hope that as long as we are connected to God, that we can handle conflict His way. And God bless you when those moments arise. All right. Thank you so much for your time. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us. We hope and pray that our messages are encouraging and are uplifting and are helpful in your walk with God. To get more information and more content for your journey with God, we want to encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also join us on Facebook and like our page there, and you'll get all of our messages, our Bible classes, and any other messages that might come down our pipe as we continue to create and try to share God's Word. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.